I'm sharing my screen today with my little furry friend there to the left. Now, people who know me relatively well in the past would probably recall that I had a phobia of spiders. Uh, it was pretty brutal stuff. Uh, if a spider crossed me, my voice would go up several octaves. Uh, I would actually physically move away from a spider. If it was slow moving, I might be able. I basically moved at the same speed the spider did. If it was slow moving, I'd get away from it slow. I mean, I could smack it with a shoe as long as I couldn't actually step on it. Uh, and Really deep dread with the idea of spiders. Now, you might have picked up the operative word, had. I actually fixed my phobia of spiders. Now, I'm not going to say I like spiders, but I fixed the phobia part. I always remember a good friend of mine made a joke. He said there is no such thing as a phobia against spiders because a phobia is an irrational fear, and it's not an irrational fear to be afraid of spiders. And I like that because it was kind of comforting. Um, so the interesting thing is you have when you're dealing with phobia, you have to approach it from logic at every point. Uh, you have to realize that your phobia doesn't have a basis in reality in general. I mean, yeah, there are some spiders, that can cause problems like brown recluses and uh, black widows and such, but they're pretty readily identifiable. And most of the other phobias fall along the same line. There isn't a particularly good reason for them being there. So what has happened is somewhere along the line, your brain has picked up some bad programming where it is overreacting to something that doesn't need that level of reaction. For example, this got very interesting to me is I remember a time before my phobia when I was not really that afraid of spiders. Uh, when I was growing up, I used to play these games that occupied large amounts of space and needed to be uh, the tabletop board games from Avalon Hill for any of those people who still remember those. And some of them, they could take 72 hours of continuous gameplay to get it. And you had all these pieces. And the only place I could really set up to guarantee that my stuff would get left alone and wouldn't get disturbed was down in our basement. Well, our basement was inhabited by spiders, and it did not freak me out at all to be down there. So I actually remember a time uh, as a teenager and before that I was not actually afraid of spiders. Uh, so you may not, if you have a phobia, you may not remember being that way before, but it's definitely not something you were born with. Obviously, if you can't remember a time before your phobia, somebody helped program your brain to think that way. So, one of the things that got me thinking about getting rid of the phobia was the fact, having children is like, well, I really don't want to cause that. Now, my children, obviously, you can't get rid of something completely. So, my children don't like spiders, but they never freak out as bad as I used to. So I would say I've improved the situation. So what's happened with a phobia is at somewhere along the line, you got a bad piece of programming. The programming told you to react with fear, uh, a greater proportion of fear than was actually necessary to deal with the situation. And then what happens is you start self-programming after a while. You make the phobia continuously worse because uh, you react to it. You move away from it. You make the noises. You basically start a fear ritual uh, that tells your body to react, and you basically work yourself up into a frenzy. Now, this could be something that's happening over a couple of seconds, but as long as you engage in the fear ritual, the phobia comes with it. You can't break the two of them apart. Or well, you should break the two of them apart. Is what I'm getting at. But as long as you're doing the ritual, the phobia is yours forever. Um, so what I did was I started steeling myself up to deal with the situation. Uh, Basically, putting a jar or a cup over a spider. And what it does is it allows you to take control. So you're visibly looking at it, and you put it there. You are in complete control of it, and now you can basically work on approaching it in a more rational way. Instead of running around screaming or jumping up on a chair, you can say, okay, I have time to, I have an hour to think about this. I have all the time in the world to think about how I deal with this. And once you get into the position where you start, and this is, I'll explain something that they do, teaching people who have anxiety attacks how to deal with them. But what's happening is when you start looking at it from this perspective of, now I have a problem I need to fix rather than something I need to be afraid of, you're accessing a different part of your brain. And once you get away from the emotional part of it and you're letting the logical part take over, uh, the fear reaction gets less and less each time you do it, to the point where it's just, eh. So, I mean, put it in the perspective. At one point, okay, good story. So we're living in Florida, the land of spiders that never die. And sitting on the couch, my wife was talking on the phone with her mom, and this big freaking banana spider came walking across my leg. And, I screamed, jumped up on the couch, was flailing my arms, trying to get the thing away from me, and, I was reacting strongly well after, the being startled could be explained. And I was so loud and shrieky that my mother-in-law on the other end of the phone thought someone had broken in, was attacking us. So that's the level I was dealing with. Now today, one of my office mates, when she gets a spider in her office or somewhere nearby, she calls me, and I'll come in, take a look at the type of spider. If it's a brown recluse, I'll be a little less gentle with it. But what I'll do is I'll either grab a paper towel or a tissue, and I'll just pinch them up very lightly to where they're immobilized. And I walk them outside and set them down and let them go running along their way. Brown recluses, I'll still smack, because just putting them outside doesn't do any good, because they want to come back in anyway, so bad on them. So that's quite a difference in ability to deal with this situation. Uh, so what they teach you if you have anxiety problems, like if you have anxiety attacks, they tell you to count backwards from a number higher than 10. Uh, okay, like for instance, we have memorized a 10 count backwards. Almost every human being, it's locked in your head. You don't really have to think about it. You just go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're done. However, because we're not used to counting backwards from other numbers, like say 15 or 20 or 25, when you start counting backwards from those numbers, you have to actually, you're not engaging memory anymore. You're engaging the logic part of your brain. And typically what happens is by the time you get done with your backwards count, your anxiety attack is done, because what you've done is you've gotten away from your emotional part of your brain and you've locked into the logical part of your brain. Your logical part of your brain is now taken over. And it's while your logic is taking over, your body's responses to the fear are already going away. So that's a good exercise if anybody are dealing with that issue. So now, if you have other phobias other than spiders, I don't know precisely what the equivalent of cupping a spider and carrying it outside is. Uh, but I guarantee it works. Once you take control of your phobia and you start thinking about it rather than reacting to it, you start counter programming your brain. The fact that I went from shrieking and jumping to being able to carry it in a tissue in my hand, looking at it as I'm getting ready and then letting it go and just walking calmly away, says a lot to the methodology working. Okay, so now I'm going to just completely take this in a totally different direction. The phobia issue, the idea of so somebody programmed you with an irrational fear, and then you've made it worse by continuing the programming, essentially building fear rituals. This has been my problem with masking the entire time with this pandemic. And I did get in a few online tete-a-tetes where I was trying to explain that I don't care if they work or not. The harm that comes from them is far greater than any good that comes from them. And, they would say, oh, study, such and such says blah. Yeah, okay, yeah, I've read the studies too. I think they're inconclusive. If you think they're conclusive, I can't change your mind on that. Consider reading some of the other studies out there, because they definitely go all over the place. One of the things that interesting thing with the whole masking thing, some of you may be familiar with an incident that happened early during the COVID-19 stuff, where a hairdresser, haircutting place, a woman, one of the beauticians, haircutters, she got sick. She went to the hospital, got tested, and they told her, yeah, you're fine, go back to work. And it turns out she was infected, and she worked for a bunch of days in there while while she was sick. And at the time, they had a masking policy, and initially, she was getting death threats from around the country for being such a horrible person. And then, once they got done doing all the contact tracing and everything else, they said, oh, wow, geez. Actually, this wasn't a bad thing at all. It was great because nobody got sick. So we're going to treat this as a scientific study showing how well masks work. Now, here's the bizarre part of this. That exact precise location was where I get my haircut. They've since closed down. That's where I got my haircut. Yeah, this fine mop of hair here. I got my hair cut at that very exact place. I needed my hair cut at the exact time this was going on. I don't know if I had her as my haircut person because she's wearing a mask. I wouldn't know what she looks like. But at that time, I could tell you that nobody was social distancing. Okay, I was wearing one of the 3M paper filter masks, and a lot of other people were wearing similar. Most people were wearing improvised masks. Very few people were wearing even the cloth surgical masks. Nobody was wearing N95s. A lot of improvised masks, and the store itself didn't even have masks to give people. So if you walked in without one, they say, hey, sorry, you got to get a mask. In that case, I actually ended up running to the hardware store across the street and buying a pack of 3Ms and handing them out to people as I walked in the door. Okay, so and then if you looked at the people who were wearing them, okay, the few people who were wearing the surgical masks were wearing them wrong because most people don't know how to wear them. And people were wearing them in all various stages. A lot of times, like, because they weren't designed to be the type you could work around. So you had rubber bands and stuff going across your hair. So you were like pulling it off so they could cut around it. And the idea that they have any idea scientifically what just happened there is preposterous. I mean, it's beyond ludicrous. I'll run out of adjectives. I need a thesaurus here to run through all the words to describe how you could look at this very analog situation and try to turn it into a binary yes no. It was ridiculous. So that was kind of where I started wondering about, so why is the whole masking thing doing, why is it being set up the way it is? And one of the things I do have a little bit of background in is marketing. It was an area of interest. I took a lot of marketing classes in college, and I recognize marketing when I see it now. And clearly, the medical establishment did not want people wearing masks at first. And their reasoning was, well, yeah, if we tell everyone to wear masks, there'll be shortages and then there won't be any for the professionals. Okay, fair enough. But then they're like, oh yeah, and you can wear cloth masks because those will help, like, or improvised, like the gaiters and other things like that. It's like, okay, nobody for a second really bought into that, and what studies showed that those worked collapsed fairly quickly. And then as soon as there was mass supply of all this stuff, all of a sudden they decide, oh well, yeah, we do know none of those are. Yeah, the only thing that works is the M95. So yeah, if you got that, that's what you got to use because the other ones don't work. Yet even to this day, you still see a handful of people wearing improvised cloth masks or surgical masks into public areas. And my big problem now is I think the masking is exactly the same steps you take to create a phobia, where you create a ritual around something, in this case going out into public, that's fear-based. And you're doing it in order to protect yourself from something. The results, now, various studies have various different levels, but overwhelmingly, the surgical masks have very minimum likelihood of helping you out in a situation with germs and viruses. Germs more so, viruses less. So why are people continuing to do this? Well, because they have created themselves a form of, I can't remember what germ phobia is, but it's probably, they've developed both a fear of crowds and a fear of germs. And the idea, you could sit there and say, well, they're thinking of other people. They're trying to prevent germs from and viruses from getting to other people. You could probably make a case for that early on when this is all happening, but I honestly, at this stage, when there's less than, in my area, I'm seeing maybe well under 5% of people still doing this. The idea that they're concerned they're sick and they're going to get somebody else sick seems not very likely. They're doing it for themselves. And essentially, this is what I was afraid of, that we would end up with a segment of the population that would be so deeply entrenched in this phobia that Some of them will never get out of it, and some of them are going to spend years doing this. And creating a phobia that's essentially going to affect you on a daily basis is just horrific. I mean, imagine what you're doing to your quality of life if every time you step out the door, you're so fearful you're going to get sick that you essentially put yourself through the fear ritual in order to basically function amongst normal people. And part of this also, if you're wearing your mask and 95+% of the people aren't, uh, it probably builds resentment where you're like, well, they should be doing this too, and I'm not. It wasn't a nice thing to do to people. And so that's where I get into marketing. This was an exercise in marketing, little doubt whatsoever. Uh, and it worked fantastically. Pat on the back for the marketers. Uh, I guess I would throw the Bill Hicks quote in here, but some people may not get the reference. So, uh, so I guess what I'm saying is, if you're still using masks because you're afraid of getting disease, consider what it's doing to your life in terms of constantly living with this low level fear. Uh, you've destroyed your quality of life. Uh, Seriously consider looking at some of the studies out there and look at the conclusions. That there are multiple different conclusions where some go all the way from these are the greatest things in the world to they're absolute trash. And if you look at those studies, maybe you can get your head around the idea of maybe living in fear is worse than getting the disease. If that doesn't work, maybe start looking at the studies on lethality. What the likelihood of this actually affecting you at this point? With each further iteration of the virus, it's going to get less lethal. Um, and maybe if you engage the logic part of your brain uh, instead of trying to justify it, prove it to yourself by looking at the different studies and say, okay, I'm going to just sit there and I'm going to go at this neutral and I'm going to try to see what it's saying. And instead of feeding your bias of where you started at, see if it brings up doubt. And if it brings up enough doubt, maybe you can consider trying to go maskless in situations that aren't quite so uh, phobia inducing for you. And I hope you're not taking this as a, well, I'm on this side of masks and blah, blah, blah. No, it's really, I feel sad when I see people who are still wandering around. Now, yeah, there may be some limited situations where people wear them and it makes sense for health reasons, but that's got to be tiny. It can't be the amount we're actually still seeing. And I do really feel bad for these people because their quality of life can't be good if everything in their head about leaving the house is this low level burning fear. Fear is bad, and actually, there's one of the studies out there uh, with COVID-19 showed of anxiety as a risk factor for death. So by tackling this anxiety, you're actually removing one of the risk factors for getting COVID-19 in the first place, or whatever variant we're up to. Also, anxiety in general is bad for your immune system. not just for the virus du jour, but everything. Your ability to defeat cancer, your ability to defeat any other germs or viruses that may come along to bother your body. So it's actually highly beneficial to your health to figure out how to get by the anxiety that comes along with going through your masking ritual. Okay, so I hope I made a point of sorts. If you agree, so I guess I ask a question. Do you think I'm right about what I'm saying about masks? Is it a phobia that people need to overcome? Uh, uh, Please discuss that. If you tell me if you agree or disagree with that question in the comments. If you like this, please like it. Smash the like button, as they say. If you think there's somebody who might find this useful, please share it with them. And if you like this content, I do this several times a week. Please consider subscribing so that you can get notified when one of these comes out. Thank you very much for spending time with me. Hope to see you in a future video.